נו? מישהו בכלל יכול לזהות שזו אומה? זה ציור, אבא. זה לא החיים.
תבין כבר, כאילו אין דבר כזה. זה הכל החיים. הכל זה החיים. ומה שאנחנו עושים איתם. אתה יודע שהיא פעם בכתה לילה שלם, האמא שלך. לילה שלם. בגלל שהתיכנה שלה קצת החליק לה מהשיער בזמן שהיו אצלנו. אני הייתי אחר כך צריך לנחם אותה ולהבטיח לה שאף אחד לא שם לב לכך. לילה שלם היא בכתה בגלל זה. אתה הולך מיד ומביא את התמונה של אמא שלך, זכרוי ולברך. אתה שומע אותי? זה לא יהיה בשום תערוכה שבעולם.
לא.
מה אמרת?
אמרתי שלא. אני לא מחזיר את הציור.
לא יכולים לצדק. אני טיפש שלא הבנתי את זה. כשאתה מצייר, לא אכפת לך משום דבר. אתה מכרת אותנו, גברת. מכרת אותי ואת אמא ששוכבת בקבר. ובשביל מה?
What Shulman does now? What does he do? He goes, he takes the $11,000. He sold his gravesite at Harmon Ufos. He sold his gravesite next to his mother, next to his wife, in order for $11,000 in order to go and buy the painting from the gallery, so that it wouldn't be in the exhibit. And then he's going to take it home. But I did want to just show one quick thing here, just a few seconds here.
אחד 40 שנה, יש לנו מה שחשוב, זה מה שחשוב.
אני לא אמצא את מה שאני באמת רוצה, וכמו שהוא, לכת עליו.
ביטוי מאוד ייחודי. אני גאה ושמח לעמוד פה יחד איתכם ולחנוך Hey, Rabbi?
Yes.
There are a lot of angry people on Facebook that you're not talking loud enough. So just...
I didn't say, oh, you before?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to be a little bit louder. Can they hear me now?
And they will be sponsoring a mic for our
Okay,
system.
We'll do the mic.
Yeah.
All right. So, that last scene, obviously, with Shulam, $11,000, buying the painting, my heart is tearing apart as we're watching. On the one hand, first of all, he's destroying beautiful art, but the art of his son. On the other hand, it's like so tender and loving towards his wife, right? Like her memory, you know, he kept saying, Ima bachta kol halayla, right? Your mother cried the whole night because a few hairs were outside of her tichel, outside of her covering, and she was so hurt by that. And it was like he was protecting it, you know, all the emotions, very, very, very powerful. And the whole issue, obviously, of Kisei Hirosh, covering the head, is very, very challenging and difficult topic. So we're going to learn some of the sources about it. Hopefully we'll go back and forth and also try to bring in some other scenes from the from Shtisel as we go along. But take out your source sheets. We do. Yeah, here's some more. Here you go. Thank you. So, now I just want to say before we start looking at the sources, obviously this is a very sensitive topic, and I myself as a man have never struggled with the idea of to cover your hair or not to cover your hair or what that means. And I know that for many women it's a very sensitive topic. And I just want to put that out there that I'm really speaking from learning the sources, but without really having some of the personal experience with the struggles. Yeah, there's some more here. So, but we're gonna look at the sources and try to get a background. But what's going to be interesting to me, and what I want to do with the class in general, is try to understand the topic. But there's the halakha, and the way that many people practice it, many observant Orthodox Jews. And then oftentimes there'll be the halakha, and the way it's practiced in a community like Geula or in Israel, and some of these really Haredi communities. And where are some of the stringencies coming from? Like especially the idea of wearing the tichel even at night, the idea of even a few strands of hair not being out, and how much pain that would have caused the mother. And for the father to say she was like, I'm not even going to repeat the word, but in the marketplace, just because of the fact that he depicted her with a few strands of hair out. Okay, so where does it come from? So let's take a look at the sources. The whole issue of covering your hair, actually, it can start in one of two places. It can either start in the Gemara in Ketubos, that's source number one, or it can also start in the Gemara in Brachos. Can they hear me? Louder. Or it can start in the Gemara in Brachos, that is actually a much shorter Gemara, but and depending on which Gemara you take, actually will take you in a totally different direction. Just want to point out before I start, a lot of the sources here come from a source sheet from Rabbi Linzer, my Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Linzer, and also I had a little conversation with him about it today. He gave me a lot of other interesting information as I was preparing for the shir. But anyways, he pointed out actually that depending on which source you start from, if you start from the Gemara in Ksubos, then you're going to have one approach. If you start from the Gemara in Brachos, you might have a different approach. So let's start from the Gemara in Ksubos, and this is what it says. Mishnah, Ve'elu Yotzos, source number one, Ve'elu Yotzos Shelo B'Ktuma. These are the people who we could go out to get divorced, and the husband does not have to give them the ketubah. We all know that one of the reasons that a ketubah is offered to a wife is in order to provide for protection. That if the husband decides to divorce her, or if he dies, then she's entitled to get her ketubah. But there are some situations where the woman is not deemed worthy of receiving her ketubah, or she did something, and the punishment will be that she wouldn't receive her ketubah. What are they? This is a woman who has violated either das means like religion, the religion of Moshe, or the religion of Yehudis, of Jewish women. Be'ezu das Moshe, what would be considered das Moshe? That's considered a higher level, a more significant level. That would what? That would therefore say that the woman would be divorced without receiving the ketubah. Either if she feeds him food that's not tithe, right? Obviously, if she is feeding him food that's not tithe, essentially feeding him food that's not kosher. That would be cause for divorce without a ketubah. Let's say she has sexual relations with him while she's in nida, she doesn't let him know. She's menstrually impure. Below kotel challah, so she doesn't separate challah. Again, when we have this is the form of truma for bread. You separate challah. If you don't separate it, then you're basically feeding your husband. She's basically feeding her husband something that's not kosher. So let's say she makes vows and doesn't fulfill the vows. That's kind of an interesting one. It doesn't seem to directly impact him. So the Gemara talks about the idea that there's an idea that if someone makes vows and don't keep them, and does not keep them, then the children will be harmed and the children will die. So in a certain way, she is actually harming her husband by doing that. Okay, so that's the first category, called Das Moshe, okay? But then the Mishnah goes on and says, Ezu Das Yehudis. How do we define Das Yehudis, which is like more loosely defined as Jewish practice, meaning there's Das Moshe, which is understood to be biblical requirements, and then there's Das Yehudis, which is more rabbinic, or maybe even just the way that Jewish women live, their practices. And the idea is if they violate that, even if it's not a biblical prohibition, maybe even not even a rabbinic prohibition, it would still be grounds for divorce without a ketubah. And by the way, the commentaries point out, that one of the chayrim of Rabbeinu Gershom, one of the decrees or the excommunications of Rabbeinu Gershom that would actually then go ahead and that was prohibited in like the 10th century was that Jewish men could not divorce their wives bal karcha, against her will. This is one of the we're all familiar with the issue of Chayrim Rabbeinu Gershom not for a Jewish man to marry two wives. But one of the other ones was divorcing your wife against her will. So actually, this would be cause to override that. You could divorce your wife, even against her will, and not give her ketubah, if she violates Das Moshe. What about Das Yehudis? Okay, it gives some example. Yotze v'rosha parua. Let's say she goes out, and her head is uncovered. Uh-oh. That means a lot of Jewish women, right, today might, again, there's actually a very famous truma of Rav Moshe Feinstein where he talks about, is the husband required to divorce? No, he's not required. It's just that it's grounds for divorce. And Rav Moshe actually says that nowadays, since many women are not covering their hair, and also if the husband knew before that his wife was not going to cover her hair, then this obviously would not be grounds for divorce. But that's not the case that the Gemara is talking about. Yeah, Tal?
If I'm asking about the Parua, because Parua in Hebrew it means not in order.
Right, exactly.
So it's not like exactly not covered.
Right. There are many indications. I mean, the Gemara understands this to mean that her head is uncovered. I mean, this goes back to the sota, right? The sota that you're supposed to actually uncover her hair. But there are many people who interpret Rosho Parua, or their ideas that Rosho Parua actually means that her hair is like not in braids, And actually, it's very interesting. When you see in Shtisel, okay, we're trying to make some connections back to Shtisel. I'm trying to keep everyone interested by going back to Shtisel. So in Shtisel, if you notice, even the single women, right, they're not covering their hair, right? But they are not exactly, their hair is not like most single women in our society. Their hair is always in braids, or it's tied together, it's in a bun, it's something like that. And that's, Rosh Hashanah would mean the hair is all flying all over the place, or just out. And not having Rosh Hashanah would mean that it's tied in some kind of way. But that's not the way the Gemara understands it. But you're absolutely right in terms of what the Hebrew means. But that's not how it's understood. Okay, V'tava b'shuk. So that's a reason that's grounds for divorce without a ksuba. What else? Tava b'shuk. Let's say the woman is weaving in the marketplace. All right, this is deemed a behavior that's not tznius. U'medaberes and kol adam, a woman who speaks with all men. She just goes up and speaks to all men. The famous Mishnah in Avo says that al tar b'sicha ima isha. We're not supposed to speak men are not supposed to speak too much with a woman. Be'ishta, they said this about his wife. Kabachomer be'ishas chaveru, certainly with the wife of your friend, right? That's what the Mishnah in Avo says. But basically the idea is, we think about modesty or not modesty. In our society, we don't think it's immodest for a woman to be speaking to people, speaking to men. That's not considered immodest, but it really was. Everyone loves to quote the idea of kol be'isha erva, that the voice of a woman is considered a problem, and many people therefore say that women are not allowed to sing publicly based on that, out loud. But the truth of the matter is, at least in one place in the Gemara, kol be'isha erva refers to just a woman sending regards to a man. It's not necessarily about the singing voice. That's a whole discussion about what it means. But that was considered inappropriate. So basically, if some man has a wife who speaks too much to men publicly or speaks to all men, this would also be grounds for divorce without a ketubah. Okay, what else? If she curses his parents, the in-laws, right in front of him, that's also grounds for divorce without a ketubah. Reb Tarfon says, Hakolan is also somebody who screams. Vezu kolan, from the word call. Vezu kolanis, what's a woman who screams? This is a woman who, while she's speaking in her house, her neighbors can hear her. You imagine in the ancient Rome, houses are very close to each other, so she talks too loudly. So that would be also grounds for divorce without a ketubah. Basically, you have all these things. Okay. So, anyways, but of the second category is the example of a woman who goes out with her head uncovered. So the Gemara asks, you see we're on 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth line in source number 1, the Ezu Dasi Hudis. How do we define Dasi Hudis? Yotza of Arosha Perua. That example was where she goes out and her head is uncovered. So the Gemara says, Rosha Perua, hold on one second. The example of her head being uncovered, Doraisahi. Why are you saying that that's only what's called Dasi Hudis? That's only maybe like rabbinic or even mere practice, right? That's a biblical command for a woman to cover her hair. Dichsiv, as it says in the pasuk, upares rosha isha. This is with regards to the sota. Okay, what's a sota? The woman whose husband accuses her of having an affair with another man, and she secludes herself with another man in front of 2 witnesses. And what does she have to do? She has to drink the bitter sota waters. But the halakha, the Torah says that when she goes to the Beis Hamikdash, what will happen? The Kohen will upares rosha isha. He'll either, it means loosen her hair, or it means he'll remove her hair covering. B'tana d'vrei Rabbi Shmuel. What do we see from here? Azara levnos Yisrael shel yetzu b'pro rosh doraisa. From here we see b'pro rosh. From here we see an azara warning that the daughters of Israel should not go out with their hair uncovered. How do you see it from the verse in Sota? Because what's the verse in Sota saying? It's saying that what should you do to the Sota? You should uncover her hair. What's the implication? That up until that point, her hair was covered. And here's where we learn that the head should be covered. And it seems to be saying that we're learning it out of a pasuk, out of the Torah, so it should be a doraisa. So the Gemara answers, doraita kalta shaper dami. If you just look at the biblical law, we would say that kalta, that the kalta, there's a whole discussion, what does kalta actually mean? But I'll follow Rashi's interpretation just for a second. According to Rashi's interpretation, kalta is like a basket. What's a basket? The woman would have a basket that actually had like, sort of like it was shaped in such a way where it could be put on top of the head and rest on the head, but then it also opened up as a basket on the top, and women were able to actually store things inside the basket in that kind of a way. So what we're saying is that on the biblical level, that basket would be sufficient. Midoraita kolta shapridami, but Das Yehudis, according to this extra category called Das Yehudis, afilu kolta nami also, that would not be sufficient. And there are many commentaries of exactly what this means, but the basic idea would be that the kolta, one of the problems with it is that it has holes in the basket, and you could still see some of the hair. And therefore, Das Yehudis mandates that you have even a little bit more than that. And the Gemara goes on. I don't want to go through the rest of the Gemara. You can read it on your own. But this basically establishes a requirement, at least on a biblical level, to have some form of a head covering, and then on a Das Yehudis level, to cover even more. It's not exactly clear, and that becomes one of the problems, one of the things that we have to figure out, and this relates back to Shtisel, like how much hair has to be covered, and why was Devorah, Shalom's wife, why was she so upset that just a few hairs were out? It comes back to basically understand this Gemara. Yes?
But it says here, Azara lebnot Israel, that it's a warning for all the girls of Israel. So where do we get that the only married woman should cover their hair and not all
Right.
women in Israel?
Okay, so this is going to come from other Gemaras as well, but I agree with you. I think that the pshat is that all daughters of Israel, in fact, just to jump ahead, if you look in the Shulchan Aruch, source number 4, on page 2, look what it says there. Lo teilachna b'nos Yisrael peruas rosh b'shuk. The daughters of Israel should not go with their head uncovered in the marketplace. Achas pnuya va'achas eishes ish. It doesn't matter if she is single or married. Now the Shulchan Aruch himself, in a different place, seems to contradict that and say that it only applies to married women. Some people say, and this answers another discussion, which is in the movie, in the series, all the women who have been either divorced or widows are also covering their hair. I think most in the modern Orthodox community, even women who do cover their hair when they're married, if they're divorced or if their husbands pass away, I think most women stop covering their hair. That's, I think, a big difference one of the differences between modern Orthodox and I think the Haredi, especially in that community, the women still cover their hair. So what's the reason? So I believe it was the Magen Avram, I forgot who says this. I don't remember who says it, but basically, one of the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch says that what does it mean when it says whether you're single or married? What does single mean? It means if you were married and now you are divorced or a widow. But actually, that's not the universally accepted psak. That's not the universally accepted ruling. But that is one opinion, one understanding, and based on that, actually women who are divorced in some communities will still cover their hair. There are other ideas that maybe they don't have to cover their hair if they're looking for a shidduch, but obviously Elisheva, right, was, at least in theory, looking for a shidduch, right? And she still covered her hair, except for that one very powerful scene when she removed it in front of Akiva. But the only reason it was powerful was because of how shocking it was. But the truth of that is there are many halachic sources that say that a woman who is divorced, especially if she's looking for a shidduch now, she's trying to get remarried, that she actually does not have to cover her hair. So that's actually an interesting sidebar. But the reason why it does get defined to only be referring to married women is because the idea is that a lot of these things are defined in a subjective way. Like some aspects of erva literally translates as nakedness. Like for instance, look in the next source, in source number 2, I just quoted the line about here, but there are many different lines of that Gemara saying that different parts of the body are considered nakedness or sexually provocative, if you will. But Amar Rav Sheshes, that the hair of a woman is considered to be provocative, as it says, your hair is like the flock of goats. I don't really get the metaphor. I'm not exactly sure why the flock of goats,
Thank you. Thank you.
A little Woody Allen, I'm not sure. Okay, anyways, there's something going on there. But anyways, but the point is, hair is considered to be beautiful and therefore provocative in some way. And the sar itself, the hair itself, is actually considered to be erva. They also talk about kol being erva. They also talk about the thigh of a woman being erva, or any place that's normally covered. So the idea is that certain things are considered objective erva, no matter what the society is, and other things might be subjective. Like now there are a lot of tshuvot. Like for instance, there's a tshuva from Rav Moshe Lichtenstein, he's the one of the Rosh Hashivas of Gush, and a few other great rabbis. There was a tshuva from the Svidei a number of years ago, although it's a lot of questions exactly what he means, basically saying that today, if singing, especially for songs that are not, in any kind of way meant to be sexually provocative, that those songs would not actually be a problem of kol b'ish erva, of the voice of a woman as nakedness. It really would depend. So that actually gets to the whole issue of hair, and whether, and the way that the Rishonim say it is that since single women don't cover their hair, right? Since single women don't cover their hair, therefore, it's not a problem. But since normally married women do cover their hair, therefore it is a problem. So why does that open up the conversation, right? Because then you might say, well, what about in a society where married women don't normally cover their hair? Then would they have to? And there are all these tshuvas about this. There's a famous psak from the Aruch HaShulchan, who's a great rabbi in, I think from Russia in the 1910s, 1920s. He was like a little bit earlier than the Mishnah Brura. but also wrote a halacha sefer on the Shulchan Aruch. And the Aruch HaShulchan has a very important psak where, of course, the Aruch HaShulchan believes that women have to cover their hair. Almost everybody holds that women have to cover their hair. But in addition to the requirement for women to cover their hair, actually the whole Gemara in Brachos, in source number 2, is actually, what it's actually saying is that men are not allowed to say brachos in front of a woman whose hair is uncovered. Okay? So this actually, people who are very careful about this presents like a big problem. They go to someone's house for Shabbos, right? Or they have guests for Shabbos, even if they're really from, and let's say they're doing outreach, and then someone comes over and she's not covering her hair. Some people say, I can't bench here, or I can't make what I heard someone say, someone was offered to get an honor under the chuppah, right? And he said, how can I make the bracha? The women are not dressed modestly, or they're not covering their hair. So anyways, there is an idea of not making brachos in the presence of what's called erva, in the presence of something of a woman who is dressed or not dressed in a provocative way. So the Aruch HaShulchan says that nowadays, I haven't seen the psak inside in a long time, so I have to look it up to be sure, but what I remember him saying is that nowadays, since women don't cover their hair, that's not permission for women to not cover their hair. They still have to. But since they don't, now the halacha of not making a bracha in their presence no longer applies. And now you could make a bracha in the presence of a woman whose hair is uncovered. So and obviously many, many people rely on that idea because we make brachos and we daven and we do all these things in the presence of women who are, it's interesting, I don't think I'm going to have time to get to it, but you remember the whole scene in Shtisel when Akiva was a young boy and he was on the bus with his father and his eyes were wandering a little bit, right? And so then the whole glasses scene, which is really crazy. So in my research, I came across a tshuva from Rav Sternbach, who I'm going to talk about him in a second, but he's one of the great poskim for the Eid HaChareis, the community that would have been from the community from Shtisel, where he writes, he asks questions like, so what was Shulam's advice? Shulam's advice was, always walk around with a sefer, and then the sefer, you put it right in front of your eyes so that you can. So Rav Sternbach has a question: who says you're allowed to learn Torah on the autobus? That's what he says. Who says you're allowed to learn? There are women who are dressed inappropriately, and there's a whole tshuva back and forth. Whether I don't remember, I don't even think I got to the end. But it was very interesting because that's what all from people want to do. They want to learn on the bus. He says, who says you're even allowed to do it? But according to the Aruch HaShulchan, right, that since nowadays this is how people dress, it could potentially be okay. Anyways, these are the two Gemaras. Now I want you to note, this is going to be very, very important, a big debate between, there are lots of sources here, I'm not going to go through all the sources, but let's jump down to source number 6. Okay? Source number 6, this is from the Chassam Sofer. Chassam Sofer living in Hungary in like the 1830s or 1840s, right? The Chassam Sofer was one of the big opponents of the Reform movement. He famously coined the phrase. He didn't coin the phrase; it's from the Gemara, but he used the phrase in a different way. The phrase is Chadash Asur min Torah, which means anything which is new. It really means that Chadash, like the new grain, is forbidden. But he used it to mean anything which is new, just because it's new, it's forbidden. He was very against any kind of change. Very, very. His rulings are known to be very, very stringent in many, many areas, and especially against any kind of change. So when it came to covering the hair, he had a very, very strict position. And we'll just read a little bit of it. He goes through a lot of the sources, and let's jump to, this is like from the end of the Tshuva, and he says, Ha'amlam be'artzoseinu, in our countries, in our lands, sha'umos yotzos purei rosh, that the non-Jewish women, they walk out with their heads uncovered. The imoseinu lo yatsu, but our mothers, the Jewish women, they don't go out that way. They're very careful. They're worried about the Zohar. I think he quoted a little bit earlier in the Tshuva. Anyone know about the Zohar? People ask this question also. The question about why are the women, even when they're home, covering their hair? Well, the Zohar says, there's a statement from the Zohar that says that women need to cover their hair even when they're bechadrei chadarim, even when they're in rooms and no one's watching them. Even the walls of the house, that's what it says, even the walls of their house are not allowed to see their hair. So it's very, very extreme position, if you will, based on maybe Kabbalistic ideas, which I don't really understand. I didn't spend a lot of time looking into what's the logic behind it. But he's saying that the women are careful, even for the Zohar. He says this is based on a whole discussion that he just had. If you line up all of the poskim, the question of having like one row of here, if you will, I think it was talking about like let's say like a lot of the women, like let's say like ruchami. Think about ruchamis. That's called like a snood, right? So those women who are wearing that, like it depends like how careful you would make sure all your hair is in. But you could have a little bit of hair coming out, okay? And he says most poskim will say that if you have a row of hair that's coming out, it's okay. He says, so the Chassam Sofer admits that if you're just going to try to figure out the halacha, that should be okay. And basically then, what Devora, Aleha, Shalom, right, that's how he was referred to her, what she was always worried about that night, that a little bit of hair came out, it's really not a halachic problem at all, right? Shulam tried to say to her, oh, don't worry, they didn't see. But really, the halachic answer should be, it's really not a problem that there was some hair out. But he says, even though that's true, and the halacha is not like the Zohar. That the minig uproots the halacha. The custom overrides the halacha. So according to the halacha, the Chassam Sofer admits that hair could be sticking out. A little bit of hair could be sticking out. That's not a problem. But the minhag, the custom, which is based on the statement in the Zohar, that even when you're home, you can't even have the walls of your house see your hair, that establishes the halacha. If something outside the Gemara, including the Zohar, contradicts a halacha, osa minik oker halacha. That minik uproots the halacha, v'nasa halacha ravacha b'Yisrael, and that becomes the widespread halacha. Haklal hayotze kol shum ser b'shum makom b'rosh upadachas b'nesua. What comes out of all this? Any hair in any place on the head or the forehead when it comes to a married woman, afilu b'chadra, even in her room, ervahi. He also says that in the marketplace, and this is based on that Gemara with Kalta, women have to have not only a covering, but they also have to have a hat on top. Did you ever notice if you go to Williamsburg? In Williamsburg, the women are all wearing shaitels, okay? And on top of the shaitel, they're also wearing a hat, okay? I believe it's based on this statement from the Chassam Sofer. I think so, not sure. So he says, even though really according to halacha, but he says we follow the Zohar. That's the Chassam Sofer. And based on that, this actually becomes the widespread custom in communities that are following that. Now, Rav Moshe Feinstein in source number 7, look what he points out. Very, very interesting. Source number 7, this is a tshuva that he wrote on the 27th of Nisan, 1961. What does he say? The actual prohibition, the essential prohibition of hair covering, of having a head covering, is mentioned in the Gemara in Ketubot. That's that Gemara that we learned about under what situations could a woman be divorced without receiving her Ketubah. And what does it say there? The Tanya Dvei Rishmal, we learned from the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, that Mikra from the pasuk the Paras Rosh Isha. That's the pasuk from the Zohar. Azar livnos Yisrael shel yetzu b'purarosh. This tells us that women should not go out with their head uncovered. And listen to Rav Moshe's very close reading of the text. What does it say? Women should not go out bifroa rosh, with their head uncovered. So Rav Moshe says, V'lo nemar azara shelo yetzu b'sa'aroseya migulos. It doesn't say they can't go out with their hair uncovered. So Rav Moshe develops this, and he develops this whole theory that really the real prohibition, there's the Gemara talking about sar b'isha erva, that hair is also, but that's maybe about kriya shema, that's other things. But he focuses on the idea of the head, and he says the real idea is that women have to cover their head, okay? So, by the way, this maybe gives some explanation to the minhag, the famous minhag America of the doilies, okay? Because you have a doily, but then your whole head is uncovered. No, but your head is still covered. Now, if Moshe goes through a whole thing, how much has to be covered? he says rove, so maybe, which means like the majority of the head, so maybe you have to make sure to have pretty large doilies, to cover the majority of the head. But according to Rav Moshe, if you cover the majority of the head, then you're okay. Now he does say you should still try to get your hair in, and at the end he says, even if you have most of your head covered, there could be another problem, which is if you have very, very long hair, and it's more than a tefach, than a handbreadth, then that could be a problem on its own. But basically it says if there's hair coming out and it's less than a tefach, then it's not a problem. At the end of his tshuva, what does he say? Even though he seems to say that it's totally permitted from a halachic analysis to have hair coming out, but he says, let's look at the end of the tshuva. He says, look at the last line that I have there in Hebrew. L'chein l'dina, af shemin haroi shiachmiru hanoshim l'chasos k'desover chasam sofer. Women should really be careful and stringent to cover just like the chasam sofer. Hov yatzmi plumei de gaon gadol kamosi. He says, look, when the chasam sofer said it, I don't want to argue with him. So really, women should be careful about this. But then he goes through the whole thing. He says, but if they're not doing it, no, even a Talmud Chacham, even a Torah scholar is not obligated to divorce his wife or not marry a woman just because she is not covering all of her hair. And Rav Moshe is basically more lenient. By the way, the person who explicitly is much more lenient, which justifies the practice of many modern Orthodox women, is the B'nai Banim. That's Rav Yehuda Herzl Henkin, right? He is actually his wife, Rabbanit Henkin. She came for a scholar in residence. She's the head of Nishmat. So, and Rav Yehuda Herzl Henkin is the posek for Nishmat. So, anyways, he ruled. He takes the tshuva of Rav Moshe, and he says he's not so worried about the Chasam Sofer. He says, look, this is the halacha, and therefore women could have hair. It's better if they tuck it in, but he basically says that any kind of head covering is okay. So that's just kind of some of the background. By the way, just like one question that actually women, a lot of people in Shul ask me, is there an idea? I'm taking a little move away from Shtisel. Is there an idea that women should specifically cover their hair in Shul, right? Let's say women don't cover their hair all the time, but is there an idea for women specifically to cover their hair in Shul? So Rav Moshe, he talks about this in another tshuva. There's this rabbi from Bell Harbor, from a shul in Bell Harbor. Ohev Shalom in Bell Harbor is a shul. And I forgot the name of it, Rabbi Yaakov, I forgot the name of the rabbi. It was a very short tshuva, and they were building their mechitza and asking Rav Moshe how big should it be. And in the middle of that context, Rav Moshe said, and I guess he had asked about it, that you should try to encourage women who don't cover their hair regularly to cover their hair in shul. Why? He says, because even if they don't listen when they're not in shul, maybe they'll listen to you when they're in shul, right? In other words, Rav Moshe doesn't say there's any kind of special idea to cover your hair in shul. It's just that he believes it's the right thing to do all the time. And even if women are not doing what he's saying they should do outside of shul, they should try to do in shul. And that's why I think, or at least one of the reasons, there might be other reasons, but I just was very interested in the idea. That's maybe the reason why a lot of women, even if they don't cover their hair outside of shul, try to cover their hair in shul, just because it's in shul or whatever it is. And the idea is people try to live up to a higher standard.
But not because of Erva.
Not because of Erva. I mean, it can't be. Well, we have the tshuva from the psak from the Aruch HaShulchan that wouldn't be a problem. Yes, Al.
If the walls of the house are washed according to the Zohar and paraded, how can a woman ever wash her hair?
Huh?
Some women should.
Oh. Okay, so Rabbi Fruchter just reminded me, obviously you know that in Hasidic communities, a lot of the women actually shave their hair. So they actually have no hair, maybe out of a very strict following of that idea. But I don't know, that's a good question. Obviously, even the Zohar recognizes that women have to wash their hair. By the way, I'm going to finish with one tshuva. I just want to throw out one other thing one other very important discussion that came up around head covering. Was the issue of ruchami, right? And maybe we'll get back to this in other halachic contexts in another class. So remember what happened with ruchami? She finds this guy, Chanina, who's this amazing Torah studier, right? And you remember he keeps his feet in the cold water just so he won't fall asleep. I haven't seen that, but I've seen things close to that. People doing things like that in order to keep learning. And she falls in love. She's looking through the window, and they want to get married. So remember what happens? She goes into, what was the name of the restaurant?
Shtisel.
No, the name of the Anshin. Actually, you said that, but in the article, what the two directors, when they met to first talk about the series, they didn't know what the series would be, but they said they met in a restaurant that was called Shtisel. That was the name of the restaurant. And they said, we don't know what the show will be about, but we know it's going to be called Shtisel. That's it, you know. There's a real restaurant called, yeah, that's where they went, exactly. So, but the restaurant in the show is called Anshin, so they go into Anshin, and Chanina says to her, Hare Mikudesh and he gives her, I don't remember what he gave her. He gave her something, and they were married now, right? But you know that in Judaism, there are two parts of the marriage ceremony. There's the Kiddushin and the Nisuin, or the Erusin and the Nisuin, the betrothal and the marriage, okay? So the question is, if you believe, which is the standard approach, that a woman has to cover her hair, at what point does the obligation of covering your hair come into play? Is it only, is it after the Erusin, after the betrothal? So or is it after the Nisuin? So for us, our standard approach, the way we think about it is, the Erusin is the ring ceremony, right? Then we have the reading of the Ketubah. Why do we read the Ketubah? That's just like a commercial break between the Erusin and the Nisuin. That's the only reason we read the Ketubah is just to cause a break in the ceremony. And then the Nisuin is supposed to be the Sheva Brachos under the Chuppah, at least according to one interpretation of what the Nisuin is. Okay? In the ancient world, they used to have the Erusin, which is the betrothal, which is a much more intense form of engagement. They used to have it a year before the Nisuin. Okay? That's a very bad, a very not enjoyable place to be in, because when you're in Erusin, the couple was not living with each other, but if they decided that they would want to separate, they would actually need a get, okay? And then you have the Nisuin 1 year later. Nowadays, it all happens within a half an hour, depending on how long the speech is during the, but it happens very, very quickly. So you have the Erusin and Nisuin. The only thing that separates them is the reading of the Ketubah. So after Erusin, it seems like I believe everyone agrees that the woman does not have to cover her hair. But once the Nisuin, then she does. So maybe you might have to say that, right, while the Ketubah is being read, someone should come over with the shaitel, and the woman the kala should have to put on the shaitel. But they don't do that. But actually, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef says, I read a very interesting shul from Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, he says that after the yichud, when they're in the yichud room, that's for sure Nisuin already. So Rabbi Ovadia Yosef says that therefore, after the yichud room, when she comes out of the yichud room, she has to already be wearing the shaitel or the head covering or whatever it is. Even during the wedding, during the dancing part of the wedding, she has to have her head covered. And he says, it's interesting, he said that for Sfardim, they don't do yichud during the wedding. They have the whole wedding, the party, and then they go home, and that's yichud. They're secluded, but it's after the suda, it's after the party. So he said Sephardi women don't have to cover their head during the wedding, but according to Rabbi Yosef, Ashkenazi women do have to cover their hair during the wedding. But anyways, between this period, you don't really have to cover your head. So I did not really understand. I think I have to rewatch some of those episodes. But it seemed to me that Ruchami, they only did Erusin, right? Did they ever have Sheva Brachos? I don't remember that. Were they actually living with each other? I don't think so, right? They never actually lived with each other. So her whole thing of saying that, she had to cover her hair, and then remember there was like a compromise with her mother, it's not so simple from a halachic perspective that had to happen. Okay, we're almost out of time. Just want to end with one little piece here, because one of the things that I want to do is actually specifically teach responsa or halachic decisions from the kinds of rabbis that the people in Shtisel, if they were real characters, that they would actually go to. So Rav Moshe Feinstein is nice, obviously very respected, but he's not from enough for them. I mean, obviously they really respect Rav Moshe Feinstein. I'm really oversaying it, but they would really go to the poskim from the Eida Haredas. So if you look at source number 8, I have the bio here of Rav Moshe Sternbach. Okay. So by the way, Rav Moshe, I have a picture there. The reason why I have the picture is because I want to do maybe another class. I don't think it's a full class on male head covering. Okay. You notice that my guess is that probably many people start watching the show, they think that that Shtisels are Hasidish, right? But I don't think they are. I think that they're Yerushalmi. The idea is that even some non-Hasidic Jews who are in Israel, if they've lived there for a long time, or they're part of the Yerushalmi community, part of the Jerusalem community, a lot of them have the custom to have the up hat, and even the Shtreimels. You know, Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he was a Lithuanian rabbi, very, very prominent. He wore a Shtreimel on Shabbos, and he wore the up hat and the long coat. And so here's Rav Moshe Sternbach. Also, he's not a Hasidic Rebbe, but you see there a picture with him wearing his Shtreimel. Shtreimel, the Yerushalmis, also, some of them also wear the Shtreimels. A lot of them wear the up hats. They have very interesting clothes. I don't know all the nuances myself, but anyways, I just want to show you the picture. But Rav Moshe Sternbach, he is the head of the Eidah Haredus. This, very, like ultra, like they don't accept any money from the government in any kind of way. Because they don't serve in the army, obviously. In fact, if you look a little bit down, it says here, in the last paragraph, he strongly opposes the Zionist state of Israel, was against its establishment, holding a high position of authority in the anti-Zionist Eidah Haredus. He is of the view that there is no connection between the existence of a Jewish state whatsoever and the beginning of the redemption of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, which will precede the Messianic era. So basically, the state of Israel has no halachic significance, okay? So you remember...
why is he living in Israel?
Okay, all right. But like I said, to their credit, they won't take government. I think that they don't take any government funding either. Meaning there are some Haredim who don't serve in the army, but they take government funding. I'm pretty sure that the people from the Eidah Haredus don't take government funding. I'm pretty sure. But anyways, Rav Moshe Sternbach. So like I mentioned before, Nucham always talks about the Zionists. They're always the Rishayim Arurim. Anyways, it's coming from this approach. So on the last sheet there, I have this tshuva here from Rav Moshe Sternbach. And he also does the same thing. If you look there, I'll just maybe point out a little bit here. Look in the second paragraph here. He says, "Va'ani sha'alti ba'atzmi pam pi ha'gaon ha'chazon ish." Rav Moshe Sternbach tells us that one time he himself asked the Chazon Ish, who was this great, also Haredi posek, actually from Bnei Brak, about this question of hair coming out. All hair. It doesn't matter if the woman is covering her hair. She has a little bit of hair out. It is a biblical prohibition. And even if it's totally covered and then there's a few strands coming out, this is also usher. It's not a biblical prohibition, but it's usher according to Minig Yisrael. And I asked him, what's it called? And he went through and explained a little bit further. But look in the next paragraph. He said, "Uvizman ha'achron." This is line number 19. "Ba'avonoseinu harabim," through our great sins, partsu geder lahater bazeh. People have permitted this. V'loveshes mikpachas v'saros neres b'chutz. The women are wearing like a tichah. They're wearing coverings or hats, and their hair is outside. V'tolim bukdi sriki b'echem merabanim shehiter, and they rely on a certain rabbi. He doesn't say who it is. I'm not sure. It might be Ravad Yosef actually, but maybe that was not part of his halachic discourse. He says we should not be lenient on regular coverings where hair comes out, because her children's health, it means, or success, depend on her tznius. You see the theology here, right? That what will be the success, what will lead to the success of the children, health-wise, it all depends on how tzonua, how modest the mother is, right? So you could see with this kind of an approach why Devorah had this kind, she's worried about Akiva. Will Akiva get a shidduch, right? All these things. Oh, maybe I had a hair out. They take it very, that the success of their children depends on their tznius. And he quotes the Zohar idea. And he says, look at this, I thought this was so interesting. Line 23. These women who don't want to be lenient with the shaitel. Now what's going on here? This is something that I talk about. They don't want to be lenient with the shaitel. What do you mean lenient with the shaitel? What does that mean? There are some poskim, Ravad Yosef amongst them, Sephardi, but they say, how could you wear a shaitel, right? A shaitel is so beautiful, it's like, all my sisters, my mother, some of my sisters, and two of my sisters and my mother wear a shaitel. the shaitels, they cost a lot of money. They're like $2,000, $3,000. Some of the shaitel companies, right, are literally the same companies that make wigs for movie stars, okay? So the question is, how could these shaitels actually be okay? Often, most of the time, women who are wearing a shaitel, they look better than without the shaitel. So how is it possible that this is okay? Oh, that's okay. All right.
Walk it back.
Walk it back. Okay, I did not say cross out the last minute. But the question is, okay, so some rabbis say, how is it possible that a shaitel is okay? And so basically, Rabbi Sternbach says, yes, but what's the advantage of a shaitel? Especially given our whole discussion here about hairs falling out. You won't have any hair coming out. So Sternbach says, look, they think they're being so frum and they wear other kinds of head coverings, but then they have hair coming out. So basically, like you look at, Gitti and the thing, she's always wearing a shaitel. She looks good because she's wearing a shaitel. And so some people would say that's not as modest as wearing a hat, right? But Rav Sternbach, following the Chassam Sofer, following the statement from the Zohar, they're so concerned about one strand that they'd rather the woman wear a beautiful shaitel as long as all the hair is in, than wearing a very modest-looking snood or a tichel, because then maybe some of the hairs are sticking out. And that becomes a very interesting result of this whole discussion. Bottom line is, it's a very, very interesting discussion. A lot of the stringencies that we see in Shtisel, that we see in the Haredim, they are stringencies. Even Chassam Sofer agreed with it. It was based on this statement from the Zohar. The Chassam Sofer himself said that if you just add up all of the poskim, you would come to other conclusions which would be much more lenient. You would also allow women to walk around at night in their house without the head covering. That was also pretty explicit in the Gemara. The Gemara says that a woman, if she's in her chutzner, if she's in her courtyard, she does not have to be covering her hair. But for various reasons, including the Zohar, this becomes a big deal. And just to explain, I think that one line from Rav Sternbach really explains the feeling of some of the women in Shtisel, that they really believe very, very deeply that the success of their kids and their families, right, depends on how modest they are. And then to go back to the scene that we started with, the idea of Shulam trying to think and protect his wife, who cried a whole night because her hair was out, and that conflict between his own son's beautiful, beautiful art and protecting his wife, some of these things become a little bit more understandable, at least where it's coming from. Obviously, we have different societies, and I was just teaching another Gemara, and they talked about a famous debate in the Gemara, and the Gemara's answer is, you know what, this debate is not really a debate, halan v'halahu, which means this opinion is for us in Bavel, and that opinion is for them in Israel. So I think with a lot of things, halan, we have our approach in the modern Orthodox world, v'halahu, and that's their approach in the Haredi world. They have their problems with their approach. We have our problems with our approach. We have our benefits. They have their benefits. But actually, I think that was one of the beautiful things about Shtisel, is that we got to see a lot of the beauty within that community. So we're going to do a lot more of this. Anyone has any possible topics, please let me know. Some of the other things we'll talk about will be definitely the whole issue with the marriage of Ruchami and trying to get out, and the get, and going to the Bezdin, and what happened there. We're going to talk about art. One of the big themes that I think comes through, it's not just Akiva's art, it's art in general. You have Akiva's art, but then you also have Tzvi Aryeh. Oh my gosh, the scene where Tzvi Aryeh feels like he can't sing anymore because what will happen to him? This whole conflict between art or expression on the one hand, and then trying to toe the line and follow what we should really be valuing on the other, that's going to come up in our... Lots of issues with shidduchim, shadchanim, and why are people having a date in a hotel lobby? Can you imagine? The frumest people! Oh, I'll meet you at the hotel! So anyways, but that's considered the most appropriate thing. What about Shulam with all of his widows, right? And what does he do? He goes and he just keeps the door open a little bit, and he eats. What does he eat? He's an ochel and ma'ashen. He's an eater and a smoker. Those are the two words. But how is he allowed to go and be alone with these? So what do they do every time? The door's open. How does that help? So we're going to spend time learning about the laws of yichud, a little bit about male dress as well. and any topics that you actually have a long list of about 30 possible topics here. TV, radio on Shabbos. You remember the Sheva with the radio, and then the TV issue with Bubba, with a lot kosher phones. Did you notice there's a whole thing about phones? Lots of different topics we're going to get to. Please email me if you have any other topics. I'm happy to stay by to answer any questions, but we'll end the class right now. Thank you so much.